Hello, good morning.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We talk all the time, but this is a little different, right,
Yeah,
for
a little
us to
different,
do
yeah.
it in this format, but I really appreciate it. So we're to say hi to everybody at Circular Indiana.
Hello, everyone at Circular Indiana. Sorry I couldn't make it there today. Hope you guys have a great conference and learn a lot from everyone.
Yeah. So I think, at the conference today, a really big topic of conversation is extended producer responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sectors that this EPR programming does affect, but batteries is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So how and why are battery recyclers really connected to battery EPR? Why does it matter, and why we're really talking about this today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with the definition of EPR, right? The extended producer responsibility is a kind of a compliance measure for the battery producers on how they manage the life cycle of a battery, right? So when they produce it, they got to have an end-of-life solution for that. And that's where someone like Cirba Solutions come in. That's exactly what we do. That's right in our wheelhouse, where we work with we basically can manage this. We work with the battery producers on packaging, logistics, and processing those materials to make sure that they actually go back into the battery supply chain. So us as a battery recycler, we kind of help close that loop that's trying to be created with this EPR initiative.
So battery recyclers are the execution arm.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah. So David, how do you see the landscape for battery policy really evolving over the last few years? I mean, is this a state issue? Is it a federal issue? And how do you feel like this is starting to impact, right, the actual day-to-day activities from our legislators?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at what the United States is doing, they're trying to understand kind of what's going on in Europe. There's a lot of work been done over the last probably 5+ years. When they started producing batteries, there was much more of a, what's the life cycle look like of a battery? So they've got the European Battery Directive, which really tries to enforce recycling of materials up to a certain percentage, and also then reuse of those materials as they're put into a new battery. And then on top of that, they've layered in this battery passport system, which is really the tracking and tracing mechanism to know when a battery's produced, where does it go, where does it end up, how do they make sure that it's recovered at the end of its life. I think EPR in the United States is trying to use a similar format, right? They're looking at, each state's looking at and saying, look, we've got batteries that are either being produced in our state, utilized in our state. They reach their end of life. What are we going to do with them? We don't want them to end up in a landfill. There's valuable materials, critical minerals in those batteries. What can we be doing to make sure that we extract more economic value out of those materials? And EPR at each state level has something that really tries to create that ecosystem, that closed loop supply chain for batteries.
Look, there's always barriers to no matter what industry we're talking about. What are the biggest barriers that we see right now in battery recycling?
Yeah, I mean, I think the barriers are different depending on the battery type, right? So if you look at consumer batteries, for example, a lot of it's education, right? So people still to this day don't know what to do with their battery, where they can take it, where they can properly dispose of it. Don't throw it in the trash, by the way. Please do not do that.
No trash.
Yeah,
no batteries in the trash.
You can go to our website and we can send you a system, a kit that can actually allow you to put those batteries in there and send it back to us, and we'll take care of those. So, but I think a lot of it's education, right? People don't understand what to do, how to either package them or how to get rid of them. So I think there's some opportunities there that, again, the EPR system will help do that. It'll help educate. Hopefully, we'll create a much larger collection network that you can have access to, and that companies like Cirba Solutions can make sure that we aggregate those materials and process them effectively. I think the larger scale format batteries, whether it's an EV or a battery storage system, a lot of it's economies of scale and just the economics, right? So we're getting to a point now where there's a large critical mass of either waste material coming from gigafactories or end-of-life batteries that will be affected by the EPR systems, where we can have an economies of scale. We'll be able to actually recycle and recover those materials cost effectively. These are hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that's required to do that. So I think as the scale grows, those barriers will be removed from the system.
So you say that EPR may actually help, right? Create and address the education, access, that kind of thing. So should states like Indiana, for example, right? We're a great state right now. And is there something that they should be looking at more? Is battery EPR, and should they start with the small format, the medium? What would your recommendation be?
Yeah. So please, engage in EPR Indiana. I think it's a great opportunity for every state to be able to do that. It raises awareness. It also, creates that economies of scale for companies like Cirba Solutions to get more involved. Obviously, make investments. It creates jobs. It does a lot of things, right, for the state. And I think by by having something related to EPR, we'll also just do something for the country, right? I mean, this is a bigger issue. This isn't just about every state individually doing their own thing. We're trying to recover these critical minerals and make sure that they don't leave our country, right? In the end of that's why you see the executive orders out that are being published with the president today and other days around critical minerals, right? You see that every week. It seems like there's a new executive order related to critical minerals. And what we're trying to do as a country is secure those minerals, make sure that they don't leave our country, right? We've already spent a lot of money and time and energy getting those batteries produced, bringing in, over 60% of the batteries today are still imported in the United States. So let's take advantage of those materials coming here and make sure they don't leave our country and we can reuse them over and over again.
So when we think about this then from the everyday person perspective, how is this really impacting the general consumer today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it hopefully EPR programs will help educate them. And when you have a device that has a battery in it, you'll think like, oh, well, I know I've been told like here's a way to, cost effectively or an easier way for me to dispose of these materials and make sure that they get to the right place and they're not, again, in a landfill. So I think those programs will help educate the consumer and make it easier. That's the goal, is make it easier. Every time we talk to every different state, whether it's, California, New Jersey, Nebraska, for example, right? It's how can we make this easier for the consumer to be able to responsibly dispose of these materials?
And the easier part is really what you mentioned earlier, which is the collection network. It seems like it's going to expand significantly with hopefully if EPR were to be enacted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of funding set aside for that in a lot of the bills that we've seen, yeah.
So we've heard often too that battery recycling may not necessarily be economically viable right now. But is that just a myth? Is there a reality to that? Talk to us a little bit about more of the economical side of battery recycling, and then how a battery EPR would either support or generally affect something like that.
Yeah, so we're fortunate enough at Cirba, we've been doing this for over 30 years. We've got a very strong economic model of doing this. That's why we just invested over $200 million in Ohio to expand our capabilities there. And we've got, on the order of $2 billion over the next, 5+ years to invest in this industry. So we think there's an economic value of doing this. I think as any new industry gets going, right, it just takes time for the scale to get large enough to where the economies of scale make sense. And I think you've seen that with the battery industry, right? The battery costs have come down because of economies of scale. So it's more affordable now for EVs and more affordable for data centers to use battery storage systems because the cost of batteries have come down significantly. So I think, economically, I think this industry is just going to continue to grow, create more jobs, more economic activity in all the states that are being utilizing this type of systems.
All right, so Circular Indiana really has this mission, of course, to focus on the circular economy, eliminate waste, right, recover material, and of course, right, restore nature. How does a company like Cirba Solutions really support attendees, right, at Circular Indiana, as example, to help achieve those goals?
I mean, by supporting EPR programs or Circular Indiana, we reduce waste, right? So if we have a system that really requires companies to make sure that batteries, and once they reach their end of life, whether it's an alkaline battery with zinc and manganese in it, or a lithium-ion battery with things like nickel and cobalt and lithium in it, we have the ability to reduce that waste because we can recover those materials. That doesn't end up in a landfill. And then at the end of the day, we're recycling and reusing those materials. So again, eliminating more waste because you're reusing material, not having to create a new one again.
But I hear all the time, I just throw my alkaline batteries right in the trash. Is that really beneficial? Should people really be doing that? Technically there's no hazardous material, right, in an alkaline battery.
True. No, you shouldn't throw those in the trash. I would hope people don't do that. And we've got systems that can help you. We got kits that can help you so you don't have to do that. But there are valuable materials in an alkaline battery, right? There's zinc and manganese in there that we can recover as a company, and we actually can sell that as a micronutrient back into the fertilizer industry. So there's definitely opportunities to take that material, even though it's not hazardous, right? But we can still reuse the minerals that are in there for some other applications.
So again, no batteries in trash.
In trash, period.
Or in your curbside collection, right? Please don't do it. But it sounds like even the most common household battery, alkaline, right, still has a really valuable use at the end of life.
Absolutely.
But what about safety? Because I think that as we talk about this, battery EPR specifically has a high conversation around safety concerns because people are putting them in curbside collection bins where they don't belong, or they're putting them through improper disposal streams.
Yeah, and mainly, I mean, look, the alkaline batteries, like you mentioned, they're not going to have a thermal event. That doesn't happen. But a lithium-ion battery could, right? And that's where you see a lot of times where there's thermal events that occur because a lithium-ion battery does have sort of a thermal nature to it, right? There's a lot of energy stored in a lithium-ion battery. There's an electrolyte, which is a solvent that is actually flammable. I think battery technologies continue to advance where you're going to eliminate those things eventually with solid-state batteries, for example. But there is a risk today, and by putting them in landfills or putting them in trash, curbside trash, you run the risk of a system being exposed to a thermal event. So again, coming back to EPR, like how do we continue to educate? How do we make sure collection is easier? How do we make sure disposal is easier so the consumer doesn't have to worry about that?
So then we keep talking about making sure that we keep things out of improper disposal streams. We want to recover the materials, but what industries then really benefit from battery recycling and then battery EPR?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us benefit from battery recycling, right? We're not having to worry about digging materials up from other parts of the world, right, and shipping them here and worrying about supply chain risks and things like that. So I think as long as we continue to recycle and recover those materials, we can reuse them over and over again. That eventually, I still firmly believe, eventually will lower the cost of batteries. It'll lower the cost of EVs. It'll lower the cost of what it costs to store energy. Whether someone has a solar panel on their roof, they're going to store energy somewhere, right? So how do we continue to reduce the cost to the consumer? That's what I think recycling, in the end of the day, does do that. It also prevents materials from going in a landfill that we spend a lot of time, energy, and money extracting from the earth somewhere else, and just a responsible thing to do.
So we talked then also about, we've got safety, material recovery, right, and disposal as kind of these themes. Let's dive into the recovery part. So what is the strategic real material value that can be recovered from batteries? And does that vary based on the type of battery that it is?
Yeah. I'll talk a lot about lithium-ion because that's the hot topic is lithium-ion. But if you think of lithium-ion, what does a lithium-ion battery have in it? Typically it has lithium, it has nickel, cobalt, and manganese, and there's graphite obviously from the anode perspective. So a lot of those minerals that I just mentioned, the first 3 or 4, are on the critical minerals list that just got published not too long ago, an executive order from the government saying we've got to figure out a way to capture these materials. Why is that? Because they're critical and the supply is not unlimited and they're expensive to extract out of the ground, right? So once we've done all that work, those materials should be used over and over again. So when you look at recycling, the value of recovering those metals is pretty substantial, not only from a dollar value, but also from a geopolitical risk value, from a logistics and supply chain value. There's all kinds of those things that really factor into recovering these materials.
We talk about recovery, you're saying no matter where they're actually mined from, but I think I read a stat that it takes about 50,000 miles, right, for a raw mineral or critical material to then reach a cathode active material, right, processing location. How does domestic sourcing change that type of landscape? Yeah,
I mean, the nice thing is you've got basically the infrastructure being built up in the United States, right? We can do all of that here. So if we've got battery manufacturing, cathode production, recycling, we can recover all those minerals and metals and make sure that they just stay in a closed loop system. And again, the United States, the East Coast has a lot of battery manufacturing in it today. That's why we've set up our facilities in those regions to make sure that we've got the ability to, one, reduce the supply chain risk because you're not having to ship all over the 50,000 miles. It may be a couple hundred miles that you're now only shipping, which is great. It reduces the cost of doing that. Not very popular today maybe, but carbon footprint. Huge impact on carbon footprint, and a lot of companies are still looking at how they reduce their carbon footprint and how they make their materials and batteries.
Within extended producer responsibility, you're often seeing PROs, right? Producer responsibility organizations. But in battery EPR, it's typically referenced as a battery stewardship organization or a BSO. Yeah. So what are the responsibilities of a BSO in battery EPR?
Yeah, I mean, the BSO can basically be, they can be in charge of things like the logistics piece. They can be in charge of the collection, the education piece. So kind of a all-encompassing overview of that. Like Cirba Solutions could be a BSO to a battery producer to help manage that overall system from an EPR perspective.
But Do battery recyclers really favor EPR? I think it's a question we get often.
Yeah. I mean, look, I look at it at a very high level, and the biggest thing and the most important thing for me is how do we just make sure these materials don't end up in landfill, right? So if we can raise awareness, we can educate, we can make sure that people have a way to dispose of the batteries with them when they reach the end of life, and that gives us feedstock to be able to process. That's a win for everybody, right? In the end of the day, it's a win for us because we can continue to build out our capacity and our company, but it's also a win because we're not putting dangerous materials in a landfill, right? So I think at a high level, definitely supporting that, requiring some sort of regulation and rules on how we manage the end of life of a battery is really important to me. What we've launched as a company, we're very transparent on where the materials are. We track everything when it comes to our facility. We track after it's been processed. We have certificates of destruction, all those kind of things. So we do a lot of that stuff anyway, and we're very transparent with our companies that we work with. And some of our customers require that transparency, and we're more than happy to do that. We're not trying to hide anything. And if you don't have that transparency and you don't have visibility of the entire process of start to finish with the battery and recovering those metals, you're not able to innovate. Like, we are able to innovate because we actually know what a battery pack looks like in an EV and how it can be recycled easier versus someone that just says, okay, well, I collected the pack, what do I do with it now? I just got to give it to somebody else. You can't innovate if you don't have kind of that full line of sight of everything.
Yeah. Really, the question will come up, why Cirba Solutions?
Yeah, look, I always start with the fact that we've been doing this for over 30 years, right? We've got collectively just a ton of experience and expertise. We've got a fantastic organization, a lot of really hardworking people in our company, and I'm just privileged to be able to be a part of that and work with everybody every day. And we're continuing to grow. We've got facilities across the United States that we're operating from the West Coast to the East Coast, and we're continuing to expand those. We've spent a lot of money in Ohio recently, and we've got other facilities that we're looking to continue to invest in and hopefully grow new sites as we continue to grow. We're growing with the market, right? So we're here to work with our customers, grow with the market. A lot of the discussion we had today around EPR, we're looking at new ways to be differentiated in the industry. We think that our EPR offering that we have out there for our customers is something that's unique in the industry, and that comes with the fact that we know what we're doing. We've been processing all different types of battery chemistries. It's not just lithium ion, because by the way, EPR can cover other types of battery chemistries, and we have the expertise to be able to manage that. Other people don't have that. So I think we're excited to be in this industry. It's new, it's growing, and it's an opportunity for us to keep expanding.
What did you want to say but I didn't ask?
A couple things. One, hopefully Nebraska beats Indiana this year in football. It hurt last year to see us get beat by Indiana, but hopefully that will be a different thing this year. And the second thing is, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Like, we're learning every day. This is an ever-changing industry. Obviously, the new administration is learning. There's, like I said, a lot of new executive orders coming out that really are applying to what we're doing from a critical minerals perspective. But don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to be partnering with anybody that's really interested in kind of helping our strategy, and we want to make sure that we're good partners with everyone.
Okay, thanks for joining.
Perfect. Thank you.